Today, we're diving into a topic that's both complex and deeply rooted in history, the story of Israel and Palestine. It's a journey through time filled with triumphs, struggles, blood, and ongoing conflicts. Contrary to popular belief, the story of Israel and Palestine goes back much further. In order to understand what is happening today, we need to know about the beginning of all this. The story of Israel and Palestine will be the subject of 2 videos for us. After explaining the historical development process in our first video, we will closely examine the recent events that are on everyone's agenda in our second video. If you want the continuation of this video, which was prepared with a lot of effort, please do not forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video before we start our journey. The story of Israel and Palestine contains blood, horror, and cruelty. Remember, there are no winners in wars, but civilians and especially children are the losers. If this situation will disturb you, I suggest you stop watching the video right now. If you're ready, let's start. Zionism, the Jewish desire to own Palestinian lands, began in 1880, when Russian Jews were forced to immigrate to Palestine against the anti-Semitism that emerged in Russia. In those years, Palestine was a province of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire gave permission to Jews escaping from Russia's persecution to settle in its territory. The news that Jews were accepted into Palestinian lands and had equal rights began to spread rapidly among the Jews. One question had become very common among Jews scattered all over the world. Should we immigrate to Palestine too? At this time, Theodor Herlz, a Jewish journalist, writer, and political activist living in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the founding father of modern Zionism, appeared on the stage. Theodor founded the World Zionist Organization and advocated the idea that Jews should emigrate to Palestine in order to establish a Jewish state. The immigration of Jews to Palestine accelerated with Theodor's book Der Judenstaat, published in 1896. Der Judenstaat is German and means State of the Jews. In the subtitle of the book, published in Leipzig and Vienna in 1896, there is the phrase Moderne Lösung der Judenfrage, and its meaning is a modern solution proposal for the Jewish problem. As expressed in this book, which is considered one of the most important texts of Zionism, Theodor envisioned the establishment of an independent Jewish state during the 20th century. Because Theodor argued that the best and most correct way was to establish an independent Jewish state due to anti-Semitism in Europe. Especially during the Dreyfus Affair, anti-Semitism was on the rise in Europe. The main idea of the book is that prejudices and hostility against Jews are ingrained in European society. It is not possible to break these prejudices through assimilation or integration. There is only one cure for the disease of anti-Semitism: Jews establishing their own independent state. Theodor founded the World Zionist Organization in 1897, and then powerful and wealthy Jews in America and Europe made efforts to establish a Jewish state in Palestine by making initiatives with powerful states. Over time, Theodor began to spread his ideas with great energy and gradually gained both Jewish and non-Jewish supporters. Theodor realized that he needed to have one-on-one meetings with the powerful states in order to legitimize his cause within his own community. By making great efforts, he managed to arrange a meeting with the Ottoman Sultan of the period, Abdülhamit, in 1901. He could directly tell the Sultan about his ideas and ask the Sultan directly for the land of Palestine to establish a Jewish state. At that time, the Ottoman Empire was in its last years, had lost its former power, and was in a very difficult financial situation. Theodor had prepared the offer he would present to the Sultan in his mind. A Jewish state in Palestine in return for the payment of all foreign debts of the Ottoman Empire. Theodor was almost certain that he would get a positive response from this meeting. However, things did not turn out as he expected. Sultan rejected Theodor's offer. Theodor was not a man to give up easily. The establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine became his life goal. World War I, which appeared on the horizon, was a golden opportunity for Theodor and the Zionists. Theodor's efforts in England and the United States were slowly beginning to yield results. During World War, Zionism made the United States President Wilson, and then the United Kingdom, a partner in its cause. The resulting Balfour Declaration became a turning point for Jewish ambitions on Palestine. In a letter he sent to the president of the Zionist Federation, Lord Rothschild, in November 1917, British Foreign Minister Balfour stated that Britain accepted the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestinian lands. The fact that Britain, the superpower of the period, openly declared that it supported the Jews was a great victory for the Zionist movement. This action was also supported by France, Italy, and the United States the following year. During the World War, the British and French promised some Arab leaders that they would save them from the Turks and gain their independence. In return, they asked the Arabs to revolt against the Ottoman Empire. Arabs believed in the promises of the British and rebelled against the Ottoman Empire in World War. However, after the war, it was decided to establish a colonial administration in the Middle Eastern lands taken from the Turks at the San Remo Conference in 1920. The Arabs were completely disappointed. Palestinian lands were divided between England and France. Lebanon and Syria were given to France, and Palestine, which was separated from Iraq and Syria, came under British rule. But governing the Middle East was not as easy as the British and French thought. It was a matter of curiosity how long these ancient lands, which witnessed the establishment and collapse of many empires, would host Western Europeans. Because in this geography, blood and war were as old as history. At the same time, France and England were far from their former powers. Although England and France were among the winners of World War, the long war had worn out both states. If we look at the events specifically in Palestine, the fact that their desire for independence was pushed aside after the Turks were expelled from the region led to complete disappointment among the Arabs there. This disappointment led to massive opposition to the British authorities. The attitude taken by the British government towards the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine took the size of the opposition to a whole new level and turned it into hostility. The British allowed Jews to settle in Palestine from the first days of the occupation, and the Balfour Declaration suddenly changed the population balance in the region. While the proportion of Jews in Palestine was 7% in 1918, it increased to 12% in 1922 and to 20% in 1932. Of course, not only the population balance was changing, a big difference began to emerge between the development levels of the two societies. The Jews who immigrated to the region were more educated than the Arabs. While Jews, most of whom settled in cities, could even receive a university education, the educational level of Arabs, more than 85% of whom lived in rural areas, rarely reached primary school level. In addition, the British offering industrial enterprises and trade opportunities to the Jews further enlarged the purses of the already rich Jews. Of course, these events caused tension between the Jewish and Arab communities from the very first moment. Civilians in both communities took up arms and established resistance organizations. The Haganah organization, which was especially founded by Jews and spread throughout Palestine, was supported by the British. Haganah was a paramilitary organization founded in 1920 to protect Jewish settlements. It continued its activities until 1948. During the Haganah's existence, some of its actions and attacks became the subject of much debate and injured the public conscience. The frictions between these organizations quickly turned into conflict. We can list the events of 1921, 1929, and 1933 among the most important conflicts. When 134,540 Jews immigrated to Palestine between 1933 and 1935, Palestinian Arabs were completely alarmed. Palestinian Arabs revolted with the provocations of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The situation resulted in mutual terrorist acts. Realizing that the train had derailed, the British government decided that colonial rule would not work. In addition, the threat of Adolf Hitler emerging in Europe caused the British to lose interest in Palestinian lands. England was considering dividing Palestine between Jews and Arabs. However, this project did not materialize when Jews and Arabs rejected the sharing models. The turmoil between 1937 and 1939, with the deaths of more than 3,000 people, showed just how out of control events had gotten. Iraq's independence in 1930 and Syria's independence in 1936 had an impact on the escalation of the events, because the Arabs here were closely interested in the Palestine issue. The fact that Jerusalem and its surroundings were sacred to three major religions caused not only the Arabs, but the whole world to pay attention to what would happen here. The emergence of World War II on the horizon was a turning point for Palestine. England, which could no longer cope with the situation, presented a plan to solve the problem in 1939. Accordingly, a Palestinian state would be established within 10 years, where both nations would have a say in government. In addition, Jewish immigration would be limited, and Arabs' consent would be obtained for immigration. The Jews rejected this offer and took a stand against the British. While the Jews' unity and speaking with one voice gave them an advantage, the Palestinian Arabs could not act together. While some were positive about the proposed plan, others were cursing it. They didn't realize it, but their lack of reflexes to act together would cause their land to be taken away from them. While the situation was like this, World War II started. The war naturally dispersed Britain's focus on Palestine. Moreover, Nazi Germany's genocide of millions of innocent Jews greatly increased the sympathy for Jews in the world public opinion. Jews were faced with a planned Holocaust carried out by Nazi Germany during World War. The picture that emerged when World War ended was quite frightening. 6 million European Jews lost their lives. More than 1 million of the victims were children. Jews were inhumanely forced to work in concentration camps under harsher conditions than slaves and were executed with brutal methods. Nazi Germany did not hesitate to conduct scientific experiments on Jews that even the devil would not think of. According to the world public opinion, the Jews had become an oppressed people. World public opinion was not wrong, but there was one thing they forgot. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. The Holocaust suffered by the Jews in World War II was a crime against humanity that should be condemned. At that time, no one could have predicted that over the years, the Jews would do similar things to the Palestinian people. The United States requested that more than 100,000 Jews who fled Europe be resettled in Palestine. The United States, which gradually made its presence felt in the Middle East through oil companies in the 1930s, was the biggest supporter of Zionism due to the strength of the Jewish community in the country. Of course, after the deterioration of relations with the British, Zionist thought strategically approached the United States, which led this country to focus on the Palestine issue. In 1942, at the conference held in the USA, the World Zionist Organization officially declared that there was an effort to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. While these statements were being made in the new continent, the Haganah, which played the role of the Army of the Jews, secretly settled immigrants in the country and began ethnic cleansing, despite the British ban. Although the British government wanted to prevent the Haganah from brutally killing Arab civilians, it was not very successful. Although England was on the side of the victorious countries, it left World War II having lost even more power. When England could not prevent the chaos in Palestine, he declared martial law in 1946. When he could not stand it any longer, he applied to the United Nations for a solution to the Palestine problem. Their aim was to get rid of the Palestine problem, which had now become chronic. Two separate ideas emerged from the committee formed by the United Nations to examine the situation. The initial idea was to divide Palestinian lands between two communities and establish two different states. In this bill, Jerusalem would have an international status. In the plan based on the division of the country, 56% of Palestinian lands were given to Jews. Well, considering all the immigration, Jews still constituted 31% of the community's population. Predictably, partition could lead to a major apocalypse. The second idea was to preserve the territorial integrity of Palestine and establish a single federative state. Most of the committee embraced the initial idea. While England abstained from voting, the United States, Soviet Russia, and France approved sharing. The reason for the Soviets' decision in this direction was to sabotage the British, who were the influential power in the Middle East, because the Russians knew that this decision would cause chaos. Naturally, the Arab world did not accept the United Nations resolution, and swords were unsheathed and vows of revenge were sworn. Even though the USA changed its mind after the harsh reaction of the Arab countries, what had already happened? In this period, when the atmosphere was tense and civil war broke out, the British did not want to work any further for a solution. Their only thought was to leave this land that caused them trouble. The British government announced its complete withdrawal from Palestine on the 15th of May, 1948. Waiting for this opportunity, the Jews immediately began to occupy the lands assigned to them in the United Nations plan. They either massacred the Arabs in the region or forced them to migrate. In the hours between May 14th and May 15th, the last night of British rule, the Jewish National Council in Tel Aviv declared that it had established the State of Israel under the leadership of David Ben-Gurion. Just 10 minutes later, United States President Truman became the first country leader to recognize Israel. A few hours after the declaration, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, and Iraq declared war on Israel. Pandora's box has now been opened. The Israeli-Palestinian Arab Wars, which would last for years, had begun. From now on, blood and cruelty would never stop in this geography. Fathers and mothers would have to bury their children with their own hands. This situation reminded us of the following words of the Lydian king Croesus, who reigned between 560 and 546 BC. In peacetime, sons bury their fathers, and in wartime, fathers bury their sons. This war, which would last for years, showed all people once again that there would be no right side or winner in the war, and only children and innocents would lose in the war. At this point, we end the first video of our Israel-Palestine series. In our follow-up video, we will talk about the Israel-Palestine and Arab wars in detail and include current events. I hope this story has touched and informed you. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like the video for the continuation of the Israeli-Palestinian wars and more interesting content and historical links. Don't leave me alone on this journey into history. I will continue to include many stories and information that will surprise you in my future videos. Thank you and goodbye.